In the last two videos, we learned how to identify the difference between fixed costs and variable costs. And now in this video, I really want to focus on how using a fixed cost structure versus a variable cost structure affects the company's profitability. Because what you will see is managers often have a lot of choices in whether they want to use fixed costs or variable costs, and those choices really affect their company's profitability. And the reason is operating leverage. Let's just start with a simple example. Let's say that we have to start a restaurant, and in this restaurant, we're going to sell pizzas. We've come up with these recipes for these pizzas we think are really good, and we're going to hire a chef to make these pizzas, and we're going to sell them and hopefully make lots of money. So we start off and we decide that we'll just pay the chef $30,000. We pay him a salary of 30,000 a year. Now, under this agreement, it doesn't matter how many pizzas that the chef makes, he gets $30,000. So the cost does not vary with the number of pizzas that we sell or that the chef makes. So as you guys know, this will be our fixed cost. Okay, so let's say we hire a chef and we go into this business and the worst possible thing happens. The recipes that we thought were going to be really, really good don't sell at all. No one buys them. No one likes our pizzas. And so let's say we look at units sold. Let's say we only sold one unit during the first year. We only sold one pizza. That's a really, really bad year. Now let's think about our cost, our total cost. Let's just focus on one, and then and that's just the chef salary. Our total cost, since it's fixed, is $30,000. And a total cost per unit or cost per pizza, since there's only one pizza, is going to be $30,000. So as you can see, this was an extremely expensive pizza to make. It cost us $30,000 to pay the chef to make this pizza. Now this is really terrible. We essentially lost $30,000, and a lot of this loss is due to the cost structure that we chose. We chose to pay the chef a salary, and so our cost was fixed. And we only sold one pizza. We still had that $30,000 fixed cost. Now let's take that other side. Let's say that things went really well and we sold 30,000 pizzas. Our total cost would still be 30,000, but now our cost per unit and cost per pizza would be a dollar. I mean, it's only a dollar. So this is really good scenario. In this scenario, we are able to produce pizzas for a buck a piece, for $1 a piece. So let's say upfront we decide that we didn't want to incur the risk of selling only one pizza right here and ended up essentially with $30,000 of loss. We didn't want to incur that risk. So instead of using a fixed cost structure, we opted for variable cost. So instead of paying the chef a 30,000 salary, we opted to pay the chef $2 a pizza. And so we turned a fixed cost into a variable cost. So in our first scenario, this was a fixed cost structure, and now we're going to look at it as a variable cost structure. So again, let's just say that we only sell one pizza, which is a really bad deal. In this case, it's not as big a deal for us, only because our total cost now is just one pizza times the $2 we had to pay the chef. So our total cost is only $2. Our cost per unit is also only $2. So notice that if I switch into variable cost structure, we're able to significantly reduce the risk of not having any sales and losing a lot of money. But there's a flip side to this, okay? While the variable cost structure is really reduces the risk if the volumes are really low, as our cost is only $2, if our volumes are high, the costing is more. Let's say that we sold 30,000 pizzas. Well, now our total cost is 30,000 times the $2 we had to pay the chef. So now our total cost is $60,000 and our cost per unit is still $2. So notice that while the variable cost structure reduces risk, it also reduces potential profits. Because under scenario 1, with the fixed cost, when we sold 30,000 pizzas, our total cost was only $30,000. Under scenario 2, we switched to a variable cost structure, and when we sold 30,000 pizzas, our cost increased to $60,000. And so this really works out to a risk versus reward issue. If you want to take a lot of risk, you want to rely on fixed costs and then just get your volume up and you'll make lots of money. However, you're taking lots of risk because if you can't get a volume up, you're going to lose a lot of money. Whereas if you are more risk averse, then you probably want to rely on a variable cost structure, because under a variable cost structure, your downside risk is significantly limited. And you can see that right here. If we only sell one pizza, our total cost is only $2. But if you're going to limit your potential for big profits, if you use a variable cost structure, and your cost will also increase with your sales. Okay, let's look at another example to make this a little more clear. Okay, let's just assume that we're setting up a CPA review course. So we're going to have candidates come in that want to take that CPA exam, and we're going to train them for the exam. And to do this, we need to hire a instructor. And let's say that we decide to use a fixed cost structure, and we pay the instructor $66,000 per course. So it doesn't matter how many students are taking the course, the instructor gets 6,000. And then we have three scenarios here. We have scenario one, where we have 45,000 students in the course. Scenario two is where 50,000 students sign up for the course. And scenario three, where 55 students sign up for the course. So we're going to charge these candidates $320 per course. So let's start with scenario two. If we have 50 students in this course, 50 times $320 is 16,000. So we'll have $16,000 of revenue. Our cost is fixed, so our cost is $6,000. That is for the instructor. So our gross profit would be $10,000. Now let's assume that we have 10% increase in the volume. So instead of having 50 students in the course, we have 55 students in the course. So with 55 students in the course, our revenue is going to go up to $17,600, and that's just 55 times $320. Now our cost is fixed, and so our cost will still be $6,000, the cost that we pay to the instructor. And therefore gross profit will be $11,600. Okay, so let's focus in on something here. Our sales increased by 10%. And we can figure out the percentage increase by taking the new number, that alternate number minus the base number. The base would be $16,000 and the alternate would be the 17,600, and then divided by the base. And that will give us our percentage change. So to calculate the percentage change is just the alternate, which is 17,600, minus the base, which is $16,000, divided by the base, which is also $16,000. That gives us 0.10 or 10%. So that's how we calculate this 10% change. So when your sales increase by 10%, what happened to your gross profit? What percentage change increase did we have in gross profit? Well, let's calculate that. So this was sales, and now let's do gross profit. Our alternate was 11,600, and the base, we started out with 10,000 base divided by the base 10,000. We get 0.16, and so that's 16% increase. So we get a 16% increase. So notice that 10% increase in sales led to a 16% increase in gross profit, and that's pretty cool. We only had to increase our sales 10% to get a 16% increase in gross profit. Now that effect, that when we increase sales by some amount, we get a disproportionate impact on gross profit, is called operating leverage, and fixed costs calls operating leverage. If you have fixed costs, you will have operating leverage, and you can see that here. Our cost was fixed, so as our sales increase, our gross profit increased by disproportionate amount. And now, and so that's a really good thing, if sales increase. But what happens if sales don't increase? What happens if there's a 10% decline in sales? So we go from 50 to 45, so only 45 students sign up for the class. Well, our revenue is going to be 45 times 320, or 14,400. Our cost is fixed, it's going to stay the same, so it's going to be 6,000. So my gross profit will be just 8,400. So we know that this is a 10% drop in sales, right? Let's figure out what the drop in gross profit is, and it's going to be the alternate, which we know is 8,400 minus the base, which is 10,000, divided by the base, which is 10,000 again. And that gives us minus 0.16, or negative 16%. So a 10% decrease in sales led to a 16% decrease in gross profit. So you can see operating leverage works both ways. If you have fixed costs, you will have operating leverage, and it's great if your sales volume goes up. But if your sales volume goes down, you're going to take a bigger hit, a disproportionate hit rather. And that disproportionate hit is the result of operating leverage, which is the result of implementing fixed cost structure. Okay, so let's look at what would happen if we change our cost structure and we decided not to use a fixed cost structure, and we went to a variable cost structure because we didn't like this operating leverage. We don't want this to take we don't want to take this much risk, right? We wanted something a little more safer. Okay, in this example, we opted for a variable cost structure. So instead of paying the instructor $6,000, we're going to pay 120 per student. So we're going to use a variable cost structure. So let's look at how this works out. Let's start with a case where we have 50 students. So our revenue is just 50 times 320 or 16,000. This 6,000, that is not a fixed cost, it's a variable cost. This is a 120 we are paying per student times the 50 students gives us 6,000. So our cost is 6,000 now, giving us a gross profit of 10,000. Now look what happens when we have a 10% increase in sales. We go from 50 to 55 students, our revenue increases to 17,600. But since we're using variable cost, our cost will also increase. And so our cost now is 6,600. And this 6,600 is just a 120 per student times 55 students, making a gross profit of 11,000. Now let's also calculate it assuming we had a 10% decrease in sales. So instead of having 50 students, we only have 45. Well, our revenue drops from 16,000 to 14,000, and that's just 45 times 320, right? Our cost is also going to change. Our cost is going to decrease. Our cost for the instructor is now going to be 5,400. And this 5,400 is just a 120 per student times 45 students, making a gross profit of 9,000. When we had 10% increase in sales, we also had a 10% increase in gross profit. There was no operating leverage. When you use variable cost, there is no operating leverage. Now that is bad if volume increases, but look if your volume decreases, it's good because we had a 10% decrease in volume. And because of that, we only had a 10% decrease in gross profit. And you can check these numbers yourself if you want to calculate percentage change using the same formula we did when we were looking at the fixed cost. So what I want you guys to see is that when you use fixed costs, you have an operating leverage, and that creates risk. It also creates the opportunity for big profits. When you use variable costs, you have no operating leverage, okay? You can see that here because you also limit your ability to earn profits. So really the choice between fixed costs and variable cost is really a risk reward type of a choice. If you're a manager and are very risk averse, then you'll probably choose more variable cost structure. If you're a manager and you're very risk seeking, then you'll probably choose a fixed cost structure. So the type of cost structure can really affect your profitability, and the reason for that is operating leverage.